guys, welcome back here to the Fishing Teacher, and appreciate you guys coming by the channel today to check the video out. And guys, today we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to show y'all how to set the hook on a plastic worm. Plastic worm, or any type of a Texas rig bait, like a Texas rig creature bait, there is a ton of mistakes that people make when setting the hook, and it has a lot to do with how many fish you're going to catch, guys. If you don't set the hook right, you're apt to lose a lot of fish. So we're going to have a demonstration and a discussion on how I like to set the hook on any type of a Texas rig here in today's episode. And also, guys, the outfit I'm going to show you is going to have this new Cast King ALTI Elite bait cast reel on it, man. If you guys are looking for a really good bait cast reel, this is the first bait cast reel, guys, that I've used. It's pretty much backlash free. It's got this Halo Vortex braking system on it here that basically eliminates backlash. You can pretty much cast it once you adjust it, even without thumbing the spool. It's got the world's first all titanium spool. It's got this alloy construction, 11 ball bearings. It's only about 200 bucks. I've never seen a reel for $200 that has these features. So I'll have the Cast King link to this reel in this video description. And if you use the promo code Randy10, you get an additional discount. So really appreciate that, guys. And I'll always appreciate the support for putting up with the plugs here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about setting the hook on a plastic worm and in general. Setting the hook is different on about any lure that you want to use. It's like there's different hook sets that you have to use based upon a lot of different factors. The line size that you're using is going to dictate your hook set, the bait category, the bait profile, the size of the bait, the size of the hooks. There's just a lot of factors that you deal with it, and it can be a moving bait or it can be a slow bait. And for the sake of this video, we're going to talk just about Texas rigs, but there's not one hook set that fits all in any situation. And I sort of want to go through the different scenarios on setting the hook on a Texas rig and explain what that's going to be based upon a lot of it, the water depth and the type of cover that you're fishing. It requires different type of hook sets. So a lot of people, guys, when let's say they're Texas rig and they make their cast out there, they're working that Texas rig, and they just all of a sudden, it's like they feel a bite, they reach down and they just set the hook on it. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to work, because that's going to work a lot of times, but it's not going to work as much as knowing exactly how to set the hook and position everything based upon some other factors. First of all, one of the things that you have to remember in a plastic worm is there's an element of plastic penetration that you have to take in consideration. Now, based upon how you rig it and the thickness of the plastic worm, sometimes you have a lot of plastic to actually penetrate before this hook will penetrate the plastic and get into the fish's mouth like that. So that's a consideration. So how you hook the plastic worm is one thing. I really don't want to get into that in this video, but a lot of it has to do with the diameter of the plastic worm and the size of the line. Because if you're Texas rigging, say with 8-pound test line and a little bitty 1/8 ounce slip sinker, it's going to require a different set than if you were using like a 10-inch worm with 25-pound test and a 3/4 ounce slip sinker, just depending upon what you're doing. So in general, here's the thing that you have to remember. Line that you're using, and we're using fluorocarbon line, Texas rigging most all the time, Seaguar and Vizex, is going to have an element of stretch in it if you use fluorocarbon. You don't want to use mono when you're worm fishing, and you don't want to use braid. You want to use fluorocarbon line. That's the best line for it. And based upon the casting distance, let's say, for example, I've got a half ounce, I got a 9 or 10 inch worm on a 1/2 ounce sinker, and I'm fishing ledges. And say I make a really long cast out there with that plastic worm. Okay, if I make a 50 or 60 foot cast or more with that plastic worm, and I'm reeling it and I'm setting the hook, especially, let's say I made a 50, 60 foot cast into 20, 25 foot of water, or maybe even a longer cast, and I've got a 1/2 ounce sinker on it. When I'm working that worm and I get that strike, when I set the hook, guys, if I'm that deep and if I'm that far away from the fish, you're not going to have much penetration. It's like I can literally, if I got into 20 foot of water, 60 foot away from you, I could take this hook like this and put it in my finger, and I don't care how hard you set the hook, you're not going to pull that out of my finger. That you're not going to. You're going to have too much line stretch in it. So that's one of the things that you have to remember when you're setting the hook from a distance. When you're setting the hook from a distance, let's say I'm down there in deep water and I get my strike, this is the time that you're gonna have to use a little bit more forceful hook set and pressure. Because if I set the hook on that worm, that's not enough. I have got to keep cranking and putting pressure on that fish to bury that hook into that fish's mouth, because when I set the hook on it like that, more than likely, all I've done is penetrate the plastic, and I probably haven't penetrated much of the fish's mouth, and almost positively I haven't penetrated the hook to the barb, that's where you have to have it. You have got to have barb penetration into a fish's mouth if you're gonna not lose that fish. So if I set the hook from a long distance out there, and I set it like that, I'm going to keep cranking and I'm gonna keep putting pressure on that fish, because I want that hook to continually bury into it. I'm not just gonna set the hook and then just start reeling. I'm gonna keep that fish moving, and I'm gonna try to get that fish's head moving to me as fast as I can. Okay, now that's on a long cast. Now here's the increment. It's like, let's say that's one extreme, that's how I set it on a long cast. If I'm flipping and pitching, say I'm 10 or 15 foot away, right? And I got my worm here, and I see a little hole in a lily pad, 10 foot away or something like that. Maybe not even 10 foot away, maybe 7 or 8 foot away, and I flip it in there like that. I'm not gonna have the same type of a hook set. Because if I rear down like that, and I've got less than 10 foot of line out, and I set the hook that hard, I am either going to do a couple different things. I'm gonna break the line if my line's not heavy enough, or I'm going to pop that bait out of the fish's mouth, or I'm going to tear a hole in that fish's mouth. Now, I'm not saying occasionally you may get a hard part once in a while, but most of the time what's gonna happen is if you have that much power that close to the fish, you're going to tear something. If this barb is barely hooked in the fish's mouth, you can tear it. If it's hooked in the thin part of the fish's mouth, you're gonna rip it. A lot of times, if you got a good sized slip sinker on there, those fish will come up and they'll grab this whole bait in their mouth like that. And when you set the hook, the sinker size forces the mouth of the fish open and the whole bait will just pop up. So you don't want to set the hook like that from a close distance. On a close distance, what you want to do is, say you flip in there like that and you get the strike from a close, what you want to do is you want to reel down on a tight line and just pull back into it and reel. You're not setting the hook like that. It's going to look something more like this. I'm going to flip it in there like that. I'm going to start working. I get my bite, if I've got a bite now, I tighten up like that, and I just start reeling back like that, because that way I'm not going to pop that fish's mouth open. I'm not going to rip anything. By reeling, it's just going to keep forcing that hook point into that fish. And since I'm only 10 foot away from the fish, I don't have hardly any line stretch in there, and I'm gonna have maximum power, especially if I got a stiffer rod. Now, everything else is in between with that. Let's say, for example, instead of being 10 foot away from the fish or being 70 foot away from the fish, let's say I'm at the average distance where I'm 20 to 25 foot away from the fish. I've made a pitch out there, or I've made a short cast, and I get the strike. In that middle ground like that, this is where you sort of have to have the middle ground hook set. Number one is you always want to tighten the line up. So, tighten the line up. Don't ever set on a slack set, guys, because the reason a slack set is the worst hook set is you don't know where your line's at. If you reel down on a slack set like that, that fish can be moving in an opposite direction when you give it slack. And when you set the hook, you're setting on a slack line, and your line may be 2 or 3 feet off to the left or right. You don't even know, and it acts sort of like just like a rubber band being snapped like that, and that's when you'll really tear the fish's mouth. So don't ever set on a slack line. Tighten up your line, and if you're sort of in that midway area, 20, 25 foot out there, give it a little bit of a hook set, but not a hard one. Don't reel down and go boom as hard as you can. Just reel down and just give it a little set and pull into it. So here is the difficult part of this thing. When you're talking about how hard to set the hook and how much force to put on your hook set, it has to do with your hook diameter. The thicker the diameter of the hook is going to require more force. So if you're using like a punching type hook, it's going to require more force. If you're using a little finesse wire hook, it's not going to require as much force. Your line size is going to also dictate how hard you can set the hook on it. Your rod action is going to dictate, because a lot of times if you have a little bit softer rod, that's not going to be conducive to getting a good penetration versus a flipping stick. And then you have the cover to consider, because a lot of times when you're fishing a worm, you may be into some heavy cover. You may flip that worm into some reeds or cattails or lily pads or a flooded tree or something like that, or way up underneath a boat dock. And in a situation like that, you're going to have to use a little bit more force to get that fish's head coming out of that cover. Consequently, if you're in open water, say you're fishing, a little 4-inch worm on a little Texas rig out off the end of a point, and there's nothing to get hung up on, you don't require that. You don't have to put that type of force onto it. In general, this is what I have found when you set the hook on a Texas rig. If you have if you're not sure whether to go harder or lighter, always err on the side of the lighter hook set with pressure. Now, what I mean by that was when I'm talking about setting the hook light, I'm talking about setting the hook lightly, but I'm not talking about taking off the pressure. You always want to keep that pressure the entire time when you're fighting a fish. You don't ever want it to get on a loose line or slack line. That is the golden rule about setting the hook on a plastic worm. So all those factors are going to be combined together in determining the type of hook set that you're going to use. I experimented with this a lot, and it seemed like to me the harder that I set the hook, the more fish that I lost. And one of the reasons I changed my entire approach, I've talked about this a couple times before, is that Gary Yamamoto, who invented the Senko, he fished the FLW circuit forever. And I saw him fishing all the time. I mean, for a decade, I watched Gary fish. He won a couple tournaments too. And Gary fished his own baits all the time. It's like when you saw Gary fishing, he didn't fish anybody else's stuff. He always had a Yamamoto soft plastic on, so he was always fishing slow on the bottom. When Gary set the hook, there was no hook set. All he did is start reeling. There was one tournament, he won a Bassmaster tournament I fished at Lake Eufaula, Oklahoma, and I was fishing around him. He was flipping one of his worms in some flooded cover. And when you didn't even know he had a bite. He just started reeling it in, and he had a fish on there. He would not set the hook, and he never lost anything. I mean, he landed every fish that ever bit him. And I've seen other guys, those hardcore, testosterone pump flippers that jack is, those 4-pounders on a jig as hard as they can, and they come flying out of the water and jump off. So go on the side of the light. You're going to have better penetration than you will if you snap set that hook. So anyway, guys, that's just a few random tips off the top of my head. Hope it helps you guys out, and we'll talk later.